Welcome back to Higher Exchanges. I'm your host, Jesse Redmond, Head of Investor Relations and Business Development at Leaf Brands. I am joined once again by my friend, Morgan Paxhia. He is the co-founder of Poseidon. Morgan, what's going on, man?
Doing pretty well. Excited for the Bills this weekend. It was good to see you yesterday in real life at the Ignited event in Anaheim.
Yeah, that was good. Morgan and I were just talking. We were both at the Ignited, formerly known as Benzinga event in Anaheim. So yeah, good to see you, Morgan, and read into a few people that said nice things about Higher Exchanges, which always feels good.
I agree. It was great to see people and hear the feedback for sure. So it was, thought it was pretty well attended too. I have a lot of respect for the Lane brothers and Jason, doing these events and getting people together it's good. And there's some good sessions too. I was, try to pop in and listen to some of the conversations and, try to keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on here in the state and trying to
we had a fun panel. I liked our panel. We had a panel about how efficiency equals survival, which is probably music to the ears of our guest, which I will introduce shortly. But we had a good group up there talking about how you've got to be efficient in California in different ways to do that. And so I thought it was a fun group. Particularly liked Chris Ball from Ball Family Farms. He's a cool dude, has good energy to him, grows some fire flower. He's actually just on the Dime podcast I found as well. So check out Kellen and Brian's new episode with Chris Ball. He's a fun guy, and he was on my panel there. Decently attended, Morgan. I think Hall of Flowers in New York heard it a little bit. Our CEO, Micah, ended up going out to Hall of Flowers, so I took his speaking spot at the event in Anaheim, but I know a bunch of people were out there, but I thought the group that was there was generally high quality, and the event worked out pretty productive for us.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was also interesting. One of the panels was the retail discussion, especially in California with kind of the snip snap on the tax situation. And I do agree with the sentiment that people were saying is like the state was not a gift to the cannabis industry. They just undid their stupid mistake in the first place.
Yep.
So, but it didn't improve the situation. It just went back to where it was. So by far not a win, but still, needed to be done. So it was at least good that it was done.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, we have a guest today, Morgan. His name is Aaron Edelheit. He is the CEO of Mindset Capital. He's known as Aaron Value on X. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we're excited to be here. I'm surprised we haven't connected sooner, but I think with the things that you're interested in, write about, you're an expert in, I think this is a perfect time to be doing it. And I would think those two areas are you spend a lot of time on operators that have assets in Minnesota. And then also it seems like, Aaron, you spend most of your time in the hemp space, and that area just keeps getting more interesting.
Yeah, no, I've always been fascinated by Minnesota, and it's really funny. It's what led me to hemp beverage. So, well, why I was interested in Minnesota, why I think Minnesota is so fascinating is it all started with when you look at how the market was created. And just a reminder for everybody is every state is like its own country. They have different rules and regulations, and it's part of the messiness of cannabis. And so when you looked at Minnesota way back, 2021, 2020, there were basically two medical operators for the entire state. And so you had, it's changed its name so many times. It used to be Goodness Growth, now it's Vireo. And then Green Thumb bought the other license. I think they actually paid like $150 million. I forget what year, I think it was 2021, to get into Minnesota. And what they saw, and this is one of the reasons that made me bullish, and I got involved in Vireo. Verano was like, hey, we're going to acquire Goodness Growth to get both that valuable Minnesota and New York. And then New York started going sideways. But I was always super interested in that there were only two licenses for an entire state of 5.8 million people. And it's surrounded by prohibition states. So eventually the Verano broke off from the Vireo, the Goodness Growth acquisition, which is now Vireo. And I mean, I still think that was like a big strategic mistake. But that I was very fascinated in the value of that license, that you cannot duplicate that there are only 2 operators for an entire state, in a state where you wrap the entire population of the surrounding prohibition states. You have 16 million people and 2 million. Now, maybe not all of them serve all of it, but you have something like, has to be close to like, I don't know, 8 or 10 million people, 5.8 in Minnesota, 8 or 10 people that you would have access to, that you're one of 2 providers to. So that's what started me on focusing. And I was like, there is value here. And then what happened is, Chicago, Atlanta. Well, one, they had a CEO come in and try to fix things. Josh Rosen, he stabilized the company, and then Chicago Atlantic came in and said, "Hey, there's real value here. What if we used this Vireo and we recapitalized it, and we used it as a platform to grow?" And so I've been very interested in that. That's a side story. But then how it led me into hemp beverages, one of the few people that like 2022 or 2023 was paying attention to adult use. So Minnesota passed adult use legalization at the end of 2022. And then it was like, God knows when they're going to start it, right? And so it turned out it was 3 years. But at the end of 2023, I read an article. So before I get into that article, when they passed adult use, the Minnesota lawmakers looked at the hemp rules from 2018, that 2018 Farm Bill, and they said, well, if hemp is federally legal, why don't we just put a milligram cap on hemp beverages and treat it like alcohol? And so they said, if it's 10 milligrams or lower, you can sell hemp beverages like alcohol everywhere. And then at the end of 2023, I read an article that 10% of liquor store sales were hemp beverages. And I was like, that can't be right. Like, Google, what's the size of the US alcohol market? And it's $250 million. And I was like, and so I immediately wanted to verify. And that's what led me on the journey. And I now have a dedicated hemp beverage fund. I have 10 different investments. I'm very bullish on hemp beverage. That we can get into, and now Minnesota's finally commenced adult use sales. There's literally only 2 providers for all of Minnesota, and nothing has changed to my thesis, if anything, because of the lack of capital in cannabis. It's actually even more valuable today. And so I've just been really surprised that more people aren't paying attention to Minnesota. And now you have hemp beverage and adult use side by side. It's super fascinating. There's a bunch of dynamics. But as an investor, I'm rather obsessed about Minnesota.
Yeah, to me, it's a fascinating market for some of the reasons that you mentioned, Aaron, but that's also where I grew up. And so I have a little bit different perspective on the whole situation. I grew up just west of the Twin Cities, and I went to high school in St. Paul. And when I was growing up, maybe it's just because I went to a nerdy high school, but cannabis was not a thing. I didn't see someone smoke weed until I went to college. Went to college in Boulder, then UC Santa Barbara. So I ended up getting a master's.
Do they have weed in Boulder?
Yeah, I hear there's some in Boulder and some in Santa Barbara. So I quickly got up the learning curve when I went to college. But when I went to high school, it wasn't a thing. But I can tell you, Aaron, what is and was a massive thing is drinking. And, of course, at high school, there was the parties there. But I also worked construction in the summers. And so many of those guys would finish a 6-pack on their way home. And they're finishing a 6-pack on the way home because some of them, that's alcoholic type behavior. But a lot of them got into it because they were in pain or they couldn't sleep or just the wear and tear that comes from construction. And so I grew up seeing people getting hammered all the time in Minnesota. And that context, and this isn't even a joke, in the winter, there's nothing to do, guys. Like Morgan, you know this from Buffalo, but in Minnesota, like you've got your snowmobiling, your snowshoeing, that sort of stuff. The other thing people like to do is put these little ice houses out on lakes and freeze their asses off and go fishing, never my thing, but people get super into it. They build really elaborate ice houses, and really it's an excuse to go out there, and drink with your friends. And so just another example of like Minnesota's drinking culture is so different than California. Maybe that's evolved a bit, but I'm happy about it, Aaron, because there's a lot of economic opportunity, but that's a state and a region that's starved for legal cannabis. And I think this falls clearly in the category of really helping people improve their lives. And that trade-off from alcohol to cannabis in my mindset is, you can look at the economic value, but just the way it can improve society and make everyone so much healthier, I think is a huge deal.
I completely agree. And this is something I write about X and I've written online repeatedly, is I think of cannabis as the great replacement. We were sold a pack of lies that cannabis is a gateway drug. But if you study any of the data, and it's just as clear as day, people drink less, people use less pharmaceuticals, people use less fentanyl. It is the great replacement. And one of the most shocking data points that I love to repeat that got me bullish on cannabis in the first place was a study that showed that wherever cannabis is legalized, workers' comp claims go down. And you're like, wait, what? And then you realize that this is the most important thing. And the biggest pushback I give when people say cannabis is dangerous or we shouldn't legalize is they treat it in a vacuum. It doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean there aren't bad side effects that you can have if you overuse it or things like that. But the way I think about the great cannabis being the great replacement is that cannabis replaces substances that Americans are already consuming that are just more toxic to them. And so what it means, how it translates is that workers' comp claims go down because they're just being injured less. And it's like, because, once you're high, I keep repeating this over and over to people that don't. Once you're high, your goal is not to get higher. Like every single person that has consumed a cannabis product is like, maybe I want to maintain it, but I definitely don't want to go in the area where I had that one negative experience where I struggled to sit on a couch for 3 hours, right? But with alcohol, you don't really pay for it till the next day. You want to keep the party going. And so anyway, those are just some of the dynamics. And I think because now to that drinking culture, the reason why it just went overnight is you gave Minnesotans a form factor they were used to. I'm used to socially drinking. And this is why I think hemp beverages are not only a wonderful thing for society, properly regulated, but it's incredible for cannabis because the US alcohol market is one of the biggest industries in the US. It's $250 billion of annual revenue, right? And when you show Americans, hey, there's something that you can consume socially that is very similar to what you're doing, that Americans would embrace it because Americans will drink anything. And that's what happened with Minnesota. Is the article I read at the end of 2023 it was 10% of liquor store sales. Now it's 15 to 20%. And it's still growing. But not only that, why is it great for the cannabis industry? Is because it's showing people that don't have any knowledge of THC or cannabis and that have, we've spent decades telling people that this is literally will destroy society. And you can show people that no, actually it doesn't, that it can actually, it can help relax you. It can help you fall asleep. It can help you with pain relief. It can just have you just enjoy. And that you can combine it with different activities and switch off and on, a phenomenon called zebra striping. And so that's the power of it. And now we've primed this adult use market. There's only 2 providers. And so you run through the math. So this is as an investor, why I'm so fascinated, and it's unbelievable that people aren't like jumping up and down on this, for specifically for 3 companies that I know have access to it. The 2 right now are Green Thumb and Vireo, and Grown Rogue has won a license, so they'll come later. But like Green Thumb and Vireo, their Office of Cannabis Management for Minnesota has estimated they need 1.5 to 2 million square feet of cultivation. That is like based on the per capita usage, and you can look to every state, they're generally within a range of how much flower you need to produce. And there's currently 60,000 for adult use and 60,000 for medical. Now you have some tribes that'll add some, but we're so far from that number. You know, in a time when there's no capital for anyone, I don't think this is rocket science as to what's coming. You're going to have one of the most lucrative markets that is going to benefit basically 3 companies for a long time, with with strong pricing that has been primed with hemp beverage.
And so how did we get there, Aaron? Take me a step back. Despite being from Minnesota, I don't know a heck of a lot about the Minnesota market. You know, it leaves in, you know, Minnesota and New York, so I spent a lot of time there, but I haven't focused a lot on Minnesota. So take me back a few years, Aaron, to what was that medical market like? And then let's walk through how we got to the situation with adult use where we are now.
Well, I just think that the way they, for whatever reason, they were like, they kept it a very constricted medical market. So that's the other big thing, is it doesn't, when you looked in the past, you're like, why would I care about Minnesota? And it's like a very restrictive medical market with 2 providers. And it was only interesting when you opened it up to adult use.
When you say restricted, restricted by qualifying condition, restricted
Yeah,
by the
by how
products they
much
offer?
canopy, restrictions by conditions, restriction by what products, how you could package it. You know, I want to say they have some small, really small number. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's something like 60,000 pages. It's like absurdly low, right?
And were those served just by GTI and Vireo at that time, both on cultivation and retail?
Yeah, and then you have to go back to like, why was Green Thumb willing to pay $150 million for the license to be? It was, and you look back, and I run the numbers now, and it's crazy what Green Thumb might be able to earn. And the same thing with Vireo. Like I come up with like crazy, like, you know, for Green Thumb, because it's a lot more indoor, there's a lot of nuance, and Green Thumb's like a black box. They're phenomenal operators, but it's like a black box, so it's hard to, but it's like, for Green Thumb, it could mean once the market's really at scale and you have a retail store, it could mean 50 to 100 million of additional EBITDA. For Vireo, I'm getting something like, you know, 40, 50, 60, maybe as high as 75. It's like crazy numbers with not really a lot of, you know, you're not strong leaps of, you know, your imagination or pricing. And so when you think about like what that means in a time when no one's growing, and also it's almost all going to be free cash flow because it's cultivation. And yeah, they're going to have stores or whatever, but they're limited by stores. But there's no one else who's really going to be supplying that market. So it's going to show strong cash flow in the future, strong free cash flow at a time when very few companies have it. And, you know, even for a company like Grown Rogue, is you can just do the math of like, well, they'll be able to produce 12,000 or maybe slightly more. And like, I can look at their other markets and what their cost is. What will the price of cannabis be in Minnesota? And you're coming out with like, I don't know, you know, 15, 20, 25, it's like a crazy numbers in relation to the market cap. And that's what gets me kind of very excited, because we don't have much growth in cannabis. We don't have, and this is also why I've been so focused on Minnesota, is it's where the growth is going to come from. And also why I've been so obsessed with hemp beverages, because it's spreading like wildfire through the US, is there's just tremendous growth And that's what cannabis has been lacking. And eventually, that's what investors are going to care about.
And so this medical market, Aaron, was restricted by form factors. I think they might have not even had flower or something weird like that. Was it flower or vape? They didn't have one of the big categories, if I recall correctly.
I don't think they had vape.
Okay, yeah, and limited qualifying conditions. I didn't know anyone back there that was a medical patient. It was not like California, or Florida, where everyone has their medical card. And so you're saying, Aaron, under that structure, all of the retail and all of the cultivation in the medical days was either GTI or Vireo. There were no other independent stores. And so with the adult use flip, do they get the head start and then they fill it in with others?
No, that was a big question mark. And it was like, hey, when will they let? But then you just study the market, and there's no way to launch a market. It's like it's the absurdity of what New York did. You remember what New York did? It was like, we're going to start a legal market, but we're not going to let any of the existing cultivators participate. And guess what happened? You had a complete and utter debacle in New York. It's finally unraveling, and you now have a much stronger market in New York, and growing market. But it was like in Minnesota, they realized you can't launch an adult market. If there's two cultivators and two, you can't. There is no product, right? So anyway, so even now, there's going to be limited product for a while, because it's
since they've opened, are they already having stock out issues, or I haven't seen anything about that?
Well, we're going to get. Well, I don't. There's two qualified. Well, we're going to have a conference call with Vireo, right, when they report earnings. But I think Green Thumb stopped their conference call, so we'll see what they say in their press release. But again, if you just look per capita spend for what Minnesota should do, all I care about is what the end state. That's why I've been going back to your comments about efficiency. What I care about is, what is the market going to look like down the road, right? And where will it be? And so part of the problem that I think, and I initially made this mistake, and it hurt very much so, was focusing like, oh my gosh, look at all these MSOs. They're making all this money, and look at how undervalued they are. Not fully appreciating, hey, this price is going to go down like this, and more competition and supply, and then all your EBITDA is going to go away, right? And so instead, what I have been focused on is what markets will maintain themselves. And you look at like an Illinois, you look at like a New Jersey, and the most extreme example that I can possibly find of a market that may sustain itself for quite some time until there's interstate commerce is Minnesota. Because you need, even if you just say that estimate for the Minnesota State Office of Cannabis of 1.5 to 2 million square feet, that's wrong. It should be 1 million. Well, we need another like 900,000 square feet before that market is balanced. Where is that capital going to come from? Who's going to invest? Who's going to operate? Who's going to build that? That's going to be a long time before you have that kind of capacity. Even like a Grown Rogue will come in with like 50,000 square feet. Who else is going to come? Then you need to win a license. There's a bunch of social equity and people that have gotten licenses that'll get up and run, but God knows how long that'll take. And so that's why I'm focused. I'm so passionate about it.
And so how many doors are there between these two operators right now, Aaron?
Oh man, you're now testing my knowledge. I want to say there's like 14.
14.
It's probably changing every day. I know you've had a couple of independent stores open, but eventually you'll have hundreds. You just will. They even talked about Minnesota's. Some of the towns and counties can open their store. It's really, they're going to open the whole market. And then you think about, like, if you just look at the border, I want you to think about, you know this, Jesse, but not a lot of people study Minnesota, right? Who are like, especially not in my neck of the woods, if you're in California or New York, but like Fargo, North Dakota is right on the border of Minnesota. There's going to be some border stores there that are literally going to print money.
Yeah, I went to school in St. Paul, and I had kids in my high school that were from Wisconsin because it's a half hour away from St. Paul. And yeah. What do
Yeah,
you have?
Wisconsin's another prohibition state. May change one day. Iowa, North
North,
Dakota, and South Dakota aren't changing anytime soon. But
yeah.
then
So what is
what
that? 4 or
fascinates
5?
me about it is, the adult use market is going to be popular because you can look at the hemp beverage and say people like THC. They've now been introduced to THC, and not only that, if you want any other indication, and this is why I think, how you go into grocery stores and there's like bananas, and the grocery store is kind of, it's almost like a loss leader. I think it is a loss leader for most. But you go in and there are a bunch of products in a grocery store. You go in, they just want you to come in, so you
Mhm.
buy a bunch more stuff. We all know that the cannabis plant can treat a whole host of issues, and that like just a basic hemp beverage does not offer you the full experience of the cannabis plant, whether you an edible or different flower strains. There's all different. If you have back pain, I don't know that I'd recommend a hemp beverage to you.
Mhm.
That may be one way you do it, but and if you have real sleep problems, you want like CBN, you want like all these things. And that's why I think they're going to want cannabis. They're going to want cannabis flower and edibles and vapes. They're going to want the whole experience. And then you're going to have a market just like every other state.
Yeah, and I think that's where it gets really interesting, Aaron, is I think this is the first state we've seen where they had a lot, well, maybe it is, you can correct me, where they had access to low dose products, both edibles and gummies. In my understanding, Aaron, is convenience stores, I believe grocery stores, liquor
Yeah, it's
stores.
crazy. I walked into a grocery store and it's right past the oranges. And you
Yeah.
walk in and you talk to the manager and she's like, it's the highest margin product in our store. And we have pallets every week and it's at the checkout counter. And it's like, this is the future.
And so the thing that I'm interested in terms of this experiment is, does that prime the pump and make more people interested, like you're saying, Aaron? Like, oh, I've been, trying these gummies and these beverages. I'd like to try either some more gummies or try some other form factors like the flower, the vapes, the pre-rolls, and everything else. Is that a way in, or does that cannibalize? Because people are like, oh man, it's kind of weird to go to a dispensary. Like you're saying, Aaron, there's not a bunch of them right now. So do people continue to lean into what they've been doing, or do they go to the other side and want the whole array of cannabis
I'd be
products?
shocked. I think you're taking from a very different consumer, which is the alcohol consumer.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
find it very unlikely that there's going to be different per capita spend on cannabis in Minnesota than there is in other states. And like just as an example, is like some of my hemp beverage companies are just absolutely killing it now in New Jersey. And New Jersey is a very strong market for cannabis sales. And so I think it's a totally different kind of experience and kind of consumer. Now it's different when you're talking about like a high dose beverage, then you're talking about like a very
Yeah.
different experience. And I think my own thought is you should have two different markets. Is that hemp should be low dose beverage, um, maybe some other slight form factors, and then you should have any kind of
Hmm.
prescription strength, or it should be in dispensaries. That's my own thought, but like I would be shocked if Minnesota was any different than every other market in terms of like what people want and what people are willing to spend on, and that you'll have flower 40 to 50% of the market. And I think now you have beverages will increase because I think the beverage part, the reason why it's always been so small is I think the market for 100 milligram drinks is actually quite small, is
Hmm.
relatively small. And then it's one of distribution and access. That's how I think about it. But like you know, but if you just study the per capita spend of what people should spend, $300 multiply, it's like a $1.5 billion market. And then you're like, well, there's two companies, right? Now, they're not going to capture all of it. Like, that would be absurd. That's not going to happen. But could each capture 10% of the market? Well, yeah. Well, that's 150 million of revenue. Like, that's a big deal. And if you have really strong pricing, that could be 50% EBITDA margins. And it's like crazy numbers in relation to, just to what this means. It's like, Vireo has been, the reason I was so focused on it is for a long time, Vireo had a sub $100 million market cap. And anyone could run these numbers of what Minnesota could be worth. It was just a question mark of how Minnesota was going to and when, right? How long were you willing to wait? Well, now Vireo's been recapped, and the market is like 1.1 billion shares. The stock's at 71 cents. You can get a sense of, it's like a 700, maybe 800 million enterprise value. But what this means is they merged, by the way. So there's like, before Minnesota went adult use, they were doing about $100 million run rate in adjusted EBITDA. Once Minnesota gets fully ramped, that 75 million is a big deal. Like, that's a big deal. And you don't even say I'm wrong. Say it's 50 or 40. It's still an enormous deal when most companies are showing no growth or negative growth and EBITDA falling. And so, like, that's a big deal to a company. You get to a place where you're almost, doubling EBITDA. It's like a big deal. And it's protected.
Protected by the cap.
I want to make one other point of all of this is just a not so gentle reminder that this is cannabis, right? So these stocks are absurd how they trade. We all know this, right? And there's all this, like, why do they trade like this? It's so absurd. And my mental lens that I see this is, I think we're even in the public space, and I'm invested in both public, private, regulated cannabis companies, hemp beverage, et cetera. But the way I think about the publicly traded is that these are essentially private companies with weird trading stubs that sometimes can be liquid and sometimes can be wildly illiquid and trade for no rhyme or reason and are distorted because ETFs dominate the volume, and it depends on inflows or outflows or what the ETF is buying. So a great example is if you look at the chart of Vireo, for some reason in 3 days, in August and early September, now looking back, a couple weeks before Minnesota gave them the green light to launch adult use, this stock plunged from 70 cents to 31 cents on crazy high volume for it, where the company had to come out and announce, there's no news. We have no idea what's going on. The stock, if I look, it closed, I think, at 73 cents, okay? So in a month, okay, on no news. And looking back, if I had to guess, this is just my guess, someone had a portfolio and a machine said, or someone lost their job or something, and they said, sell. They pressed a button and hit sell. And 5 or 6 million shares over 3 days for a stock that at the time was maybe trading 150, 200,000 shares a day, drove it immediately down to 31 cents. The stock is completely, it's now higher than it was on August, I think it's like August 28th. But this highlights a very, very, very important point. You hear me being very excited about cannabis. You're like, oh my gosh, Vireo is this amazing, or Green Thumb, I'm going to go out and buy it, or Grown Rogue. Please know that these stocks are wildly illiquid, wildly volatile. And if you don't fully understand, now I was buying then, even though I was like pulling my hair out, because it's my Vireo is my second largest position. It doesn't feel good when your second largest position goes down over 50% in 3 days on notice. But you have to understand that you could wake up and these stocks could be down. There could be a negative comment, a negative headline, and these stocks could easily be down 20%. 40%, 50%. And if you cannot handle that, this will be some financial impact to your way of life, please do not invest in these stocks. But this is part of both the challenge and opportunity. Yeah. I just wanted to put that in because I get very excited and I want people to know that there's danger here and opportunity.
And so last question that I'll throw it over to you, Morgan. How do you see this market evolving over the next few years? Like, it's really clear, Aaron, there's an excellent near-term opportunity, but you also made the point that I think part of the trap that we've all followed into as cannabis investors in the past is not just extrapolating that things are going to continue like they are. I don't think we were that naive, but we didn't accurately forecast how markets were going to evolve. And I think the other part of that is some of these adult use flips have taken a lot longer. So there's nuances to the struggle we've had on the investing side, but really one of the keys is being able to evaluate where do we go from here. So help me with your perspective, Aaron, both on how Minnesota evolves from a pricing and sales perspective, but also in terms of competitive competition on the operator and the cultivation side.
It's a great point. And I think you're going to have a couple of years of high pricing. And then eventually pricing is going to come down. But unless there's interstate commerce, and that's a whole nother conversation, and why Glass House is interested and Grow Rogue is interesting because of the potential of interstate commerce. But let's put that to the side for a second.
Raising his hand. You can't see it. It's
all I'm sorry.
I would like to argue Leaf Brands is interesting.
Yeah, look, basically, no. I'm so sorry that
no, you're good. I'm just joking.
It's all of California, all of Oregon, Washington, basically every. It's just in my world where I paid attention so far is like all of them will benefit. So let's just put that aside because we don't know when this is going to happen. But what you need to do is, this is why it's so important to understand the structure of the market, to understand that, like, why is Illinois different than Massachusetts? And why is New Jersey different than Nevada? Why would Minnesota be different than California? And so I think you're going to have like what I would call excess profits and revenue for a while in Minnesota, but then prices will come down. But unless you have some kind of interstate commerce, prices should remain elevated, more like in Illinois or in New Jersey than other markets, because it's just going to be undersupplied. There just won't be enough cultivation capacity. Now, you need to pay attention to the news and make sure that things haven't changed. And if you suddenly started reading stories that people were building facilities like crazy, or a bunch of capital was entering the industry, and you would reassess your view. But the reason why I'm so excited about Minnesota is you're going to have higher prices for longer because of the structural nature of the market. Now, what will change is, let's say Wisconsin decides to legalize. Well, then that will probably have an impact on Minnesota, just like when Ohio did. Even though Michigan has low prices, I believe Ohio, just for the convenience factor, impacted Michigan because you could just conveniently buy, even though the prices are higher in Ohio, and there was a little bit of a speed bump where you've had prices come down in Michigan. You've seen this in a number of regards. Anytime a neighboring state is you're benefiting from the prohibition. If the prohibition goes away, you're going to have an impact. But even with that, it's unlikely you're going to have the real crazy competition that you see in other states, in Minnesota, just because it's structurally, they just don't have enough cultivation. So does that mean, so you could have $3,000 a pound, $2,500 a pound for a while or north of that. But I think over time, it probably comes down to like 1,500 or 1,800 or 1,500 to 2,000, which is more like in Illinois than like a California.
Yeah. Well, cool. Why don't I throw it over to you, Morgan? And we've been talking some hemp, but let's dig in a little bit more on the hemp side.
Yeah. So just real quick question as I get into this. Is hemp beverage the only form factor of intoxicating hemp allowed in Missouri or Minnesota?
I believe they allow gummies. low dose gummies.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I was wondering, do you know because it's trying to make apples to apples here. So the price per milligram of THC in beverage versus like at a cannabis retail in Minnesota?
Well, I can just tell you this. I mean, my largest hemp beverage investment is this phenomenal company and group of people that run it, Uncle Arnie's, and they're selling a low dose. They're selling a 10 milligram shot at retail for $2.99, and it's unbelievable. They're struggling to keep it in stock. It's I think pound for pound, it is the best investment on a safe mind-altering ingestible that you could get compared across almost anything, alcohol, anything. I would find it hard to believe that you could compete with that.
Right. Does Minnesota grow its own, or do they bring in a lot of biomass for making their, or like Uncle Arnie's, do they have facilities there, or do they make it all like in California?
So I think the requirement, it's a good question. I know that they have bottlers in Minnesota and in other markets as well.
Right.
I visited it as well. And so part of having the drinking culture and part of what's been so great about Minnesota and why everyone's kind of embraced it is it has been this incredible lifeline to breweries who suddenly can now have a line of hemp beverage.
Yep.
And do the bottling and co-packing. And I visited one of them, and it's phenomenal. And they're so excited because now it's such a fixed cost business having all that expensive equipment, and it's just all of a sudden like things are just so much better as opposed to being dire because people are drinking like they used to.
Right. Yeah. Just testing your thesis on the and maybe answering why Vireo and like GTI are not scrambling to build hundreds of thousands of more square feet is
but they can't. By the way, they can't. They cannot. They're restricted. They cannot build anymore.
The state
they were allowed into the market, but whatever they have, they have.
Yeah, they have. Okay. I mean, they might be happy about that because to your point of if a shot of Uncle Arnie's, a 10 milligram shot, which is just cannabis, they just call it hemp, right? I mean, it's THC. If it's Delta 9, it gets you high. It doesn't. I don't care where it comes from, but that versus 10 milligram from a cannabis retail is not going to be $2.99, right? So that's a huge discrepancy in price. So it's like for the value shoppers, what are they going to choose? They're going to go for $2.99.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're probably, but you'll have innovations in the market. I just think it's whenever I look at every cannabis market, you're going to have cannabis consumers that love the flower, and it's going to be like 40 to 50% of the market, and they may have a cannabis beverage. But when I talk to someone who loves flower, they're like, oh, I'll drink it. But it's like, I don't see them as the main consumers. You have value people who are like, what's the cheapest way I can get high? And we have this in California, by the way. It's like, Uncle Arnie's is the #1 cannabis beverage in the dispensary network in California. They sell 100 milligram drinks, and it's like for $8. And I'm like, well, who drinks 100 milligram drinks? And you have some high tolerance people, but it turns out that you have value shoppers because they're resealable lids that they're having 10 or 20 a night. And so for all week for $8, they can get high.
Right.
But that doesn't stop the consumers from going in and buying flour and buying all different other form factors. It just, that's what the value consumer is going to go for.
Right. Well, and Jesse and I are like, this is actually a great discussion because Jesse's definitely much more, he's a connoisseur. I'd say like quality flour is very important to him.
Yeah.
And I actually like beverage. So I get, enough satisfaction and I enjoy the form factor. I enjoy having something to sip on.
I'm the same way as you, Morgan. So I can consume flour, but it's like, I'd much rather just have, because for me, it's like, I just want to relax at the end of the day, as opposed to,
so we're more like the alcohol conversion.
Yeah. I'm a former alcohol consumer. I think I've had 5 beers this year. And if you had gone back 10 years ago, that number would have been very different.
Yeah.
But Morgan, let me unpack that number for a second, Morgan, because we were saying $2.99 for 10 milligrams. And so if you multiply that by 10 for a 100 milligram serving, how much do you think 100 milligrams, so like a pack of 100 milligram, distillate gummies, California's a bad example, but let's say nationwide, what is that? Like 15, $20 for 100 milligram, think of edibles that are 10 each. Does that seem about right?
I think that sounds right.
And so, Morgan, if you're saying the Uncle Arnie's shot is $3 for 10, that's the equivalent of $30 for 100 milligrams. So it looks to me, I don't know what pricing on edibles is in Minnesota, but it looks to me like on that basis, the hemp channel could be the more expensive option relative to a dispensary.
Yeah, when you do, yeah. I mean, I understand what you're.
See, that's why what I was more comparing it to. It's interesting you went there, Morgan, because what I was more comparing it to was a beer or a glass of wine, or I'm like for $2.99, if you want to relax at the end of the night, like that, no alcohol product could beat this.
Right,
it's pretty good tasting. It's pretty good tasting, and then you can get one that's for sleep that has a little bit of CBN in it, and it's like. For $2.99, what an incredible deal. Yeah. I was thinking more of alcohol. I wasn't comparing it to red. Because again, I don't think of this as competition. I would be shocked. I mean, basically everyone that I've met, and this is just anecdotally, and this is why Minnesota is so fascinating about what's going to happen. Everyone who I've met who really loves low-dose beverage or loves flower, they might consume one or the other, but it's a different consumer. And it's a different experience, I think, a beverage experience versus what you see in the dispensary.
Right.
If I wanted to have a great time with friends, I don't know if I would go for I might bring some beverage, but I think flower might be more fun.
Yeah.
Or if I was in pain or had some serious stuff that I wanted a full effect. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just had a person, it's one of the most gratifying things. I have a friend that I've known for a while, and his wife just had spinal fusion, and it went wrong. And she's had like 7 or 8 corrective things, and she's just in tremendous pain and can't really sleep. And they've tried opioid, they've tried all this stuff. I'm not sending her hemp beverages, right? I'm reaching out to my contacts and being like, hey, what do you have for pain? What works for pain relief? Whether it's
like an RSO or something.
Whether it's flower, edibles, full spectrum edibles. And so, like, to me, I just think it's a different use case, occasion.
So, as you're very active in the hemp beverage space, and capital markets continue to be super tough. How is it in the hemp beverage space? Like, how are these companies finding capital to scale up?
It's hard. All of cannabis is hard.
Yeah.
With Uncle Arnie's, like we led this round that Uncle Arnie's co-led with another firm, Delta Emerald. I worked for like 4.5 months. And I thought I had a pretty incredible story, which is a company that had grown, a crazy amount and was number 1 or number 2 in every market. And the co-founder of Boston Beer, the co-founder of the craft movement, was an early investor, was investing more and joining me on the board. And I still, was working really hard and not to totally put myself down. But it's absurd that I am either the largest or one of the largest hemp beverage investors out there. I should not be it. And it tells you the state of, Morgan, you probably know this well. It's really hard to raise money. It's really hard for these companies to get money. But that's both the challenge and the opportunity. And then if you get the money, this is also why like Vireo is so interesting. They have $100 million on their balance sheet and an equity that they're trading. It's like, if you have capital, it's why Green Thumb is so interesting. You have capital, you are king right now. And so it's like, it's the haves and the have-nots of who can grow, who can go faster, who can invest in sales and marketing. And so like, and Uncle Arnie's is, you know, last year they spent $1 million on sales and marketing. This year, 2 million. Well, now they got a ton of capital. They're going to try to spend 6 or 7. And it's like, it's the way I think about hemp beverages. It's like the Oklahoma land race. You study any kind of beverage market, there's a first mover advantage. You get on the shelf, you sell, you support those sales. It's very hard to get you off that shelf. So you kind of want to get across without the wheels coming off and plant your flag on the shelf. And so the way I've been talking to my hemp beverage portfolio companies and every company, I don't think it's any different, is like, I think in hemp beverage, risk and reward are rising at the same time. And what that means is, I believe we're getting close to where there'll be a lights on moment. And maybe it's that we realize by the end of the year, there's no hemp beverage, there's no federal hemp ban. And then you realize in a midterm, it's not going to happen. I mean, you literally have the president of the United States posting a video of the benefits of hemp CBD. It feels really challenging to think that the federal government is going to ban hemp when the president's doing that. And also you have like Rand Paul saying, I'm going to block everything. But I mean, it's still possible that they could put it into a continuing resolution, stuff like that. But I think the pot at the end of the rainbow is so big when you say, is the rest of the US going to be similar to Minnesota? And why would it be different long term? And if you say, well, it's going to be 10 or 20% of the market, that's $25 to $50 billion. It's like a crazy, insane number. Where I think the leading company has like 40 or 50 million in sales. So it's like wide open, right? And so my sense is that risk and reward are rising at the same time. What does that mean? It could be just like in cannabis, if you get federal reform, that it's like a lights on moment. In other words, you go from no capital to all capital, from no competition to all competition. And so it's my view that you need to get scale, you need to get your organization set, and you need to move as quickly as possible responsibly, because unless some other entity comes in and provides you with capital or buys you out, I don't know how you compete with the really big boys or the ton of capital that could flood into the space.
Yeah. Well, and there are thousands of hemp beverage companies, right? I mean, because there's
well,
plenty that
brands. I wouldn't call them companies. When you do the research, this is a very important point. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of brands and drinks. My opinion, based on researching the whole space, is there might be 20 investable companies.
Correct. Yeah, very, very different point. Yes, because like I think a clear differentiation between the hemp beverage and cannabis. Cannabis is, by the legal framework, does have barriers to competition. I say that in California, we did have thousands of California brands at one point, and almost all of them are gone, right? But in hemp beverage, all like these microbrews, they're all getting into it, like, because they're losing sales, and so they're trying to add that back and using all of their infrastructure and their shelf space and all their distribution that they already have. So like it's a very different competitive landscape, right? So like how are you
100% correct.
Yeah. So how are you navigating?
To your point,
to your point,
who asked the question about the regulation change in Minnesota? Do you remember? Hirsch, that's right.
Oh yeah.
So this is a wonderful point that Hirsch mentioned. So as we all know, cannabis regulations are absurd, and regulators and lawmakers regularly in every state, to your point, it's like California is a great example. The legal industry is on the ropes. Let's raise taxes. No, let's take it back. Look what we did for you. Cannabis industry, we took away this tax increase. It's like, what? You've done nothing for us. Well, Minnesota, for whatever reason, passed a law that you needed to use an in-state lab to test your products. There are 2 right now. And if you talk to the brands, they're like, 2 is not enough to get the flow of products. But then they've done other stuff like you have to, and I want to make sure that I say this correctly. So you also need to get a license number and put it on the can, but no one has gotten the license number and won't get it until October 31st. So it's kind of almost impossible to be fully compliant or to have a QR code that goes to show the manufacturing and the COA. And the way when I talk to my companies or whatever, it's not like, oh, this is going to be a mess. But what it's also going to do is it's going to wipe out hundreds of brands. They just won't be able to. This is the very important point of the difference between a brand and a company. There are many people that are participating in the space that have no capability to keep up with strict regulation, packaging changes. It's going to wipe them all out. And my belief, and some of the companies that I talk to, is I think you're about to have a wipeout event in Minnesota. And the way I describe, and this is like as an investor, I think and as a consumer, I actually want strict regulation. I actually want the highest standards. I want companies that have to go through hoops to make sure that everything is safe. And what it's going to do is it's going to wipe out all the smaller competition. And I think you're going to have a much healthier, stronger market for the survivors in Minnesota. When some of these new regulations come in that are really require special things on the can that tie into a website, and they're going to pull product. And you're seeing already in Florida, they're being very strict about coloring and all these people that are not, or company brands that are not companies. Yeah, that brands that are not companies, that don't have compliance departments or people that are paying attention and can ship, they just won't survive.
Yeah.
So long term, I actually think it's a fantastic thing.
Yeah.
And it's what's going to differentiate the companies that at least I believe I'm investing in, than just, because the easiest thing in the world, well, the three of us could be like, hey, I have a great idea for a drink. We can launch a drink. That's the easiest part. Everything becomes so much harder after that.
So,
and all these shifting regulations and changes, it's just another barrier. So it looks like there's no barriers, but there's actually an incredible amount of barriers, from testing to who your partners are, to who your distributors are, to who, and the national distributors are going to enter soon. So then you're going to have other brands that are, there's this whole strategy thing of like, hey, how do I enter a state like Florida or Texas? Do I just cobble together all these distributors, or do I wait for one of the big boys to come in and then they'll just carry me with everything? Well, I got to wait for the big boys to come in, but if I sign up with all the little ones, there are all these buyout clauses. And then how do I transit? It becomes a nightmare very quickly. So there's actually tremendous barriers to beverage. It just doesn't look that way from the
well, and to your point about like the shifting landscape, I mean, California passed the bill, what is it, AB 228, that banned synthetics, right? They banned everything.
They banned everything
until January 28th, and then it can be sold through cannabis retail, right? So it's just, they're pushing it there. I just saw Ohio governor banned all intoxicating products.
I believe the Ohio is what he's trying to do, is force the legislature to work.
Yeah.
On something.
Well, because it was a disaster, right? I mean, like all the gas stations were just selling whatever, and where they wouldn't even allow pre-roll in the legal stores. So like there was a huge issue going on there that.
Yeah, I'm in favor of regulation, and I think regulation is a great thing. And just think about you're an Ohio brand and all of a sudden your market's off. It's like, it's really hard to recover from that if you're not like a national company with resources. And this is part of
Jesse's heard me say this plenty of times, but I believe beverage survives in the alcohol distribution ultimately, because there's testing, there's distribution, there's plenty of age verification. Yeah.
And that's why I believe you're not going to have a full hemp ban, is because the alcohol industry sees this as an incredible opportunity. And you now have a powerful political actors that are willing to advocate for at least part of the THC system. And I believe beverage is a completely unique thing that is different, and it's not well served in dispensaries. Maybe high dose products are. And that's why I'm so bullish on it.
Right. Two questions, and I'll pass back to Jesse. But I find this incredibly interesting. I asked Tucker this when we had him on about him, a few weeks ago. When we talk about hemp at the national level, it's all about protecting the farmers, but we don't talk about cannabis in the same way, and they're farmers too. From your experience with all these hemp companies, how did they get the branding right that we need to protect these farmers, but we don't give a shit about cannabis farmers?
That's a complicated question. Here's how I viewed hemp and cannabis. I wish that there was less fighting from, and I think this has changed when it initially started developing. You have a lot more cannabis companies who are like, hey, this hemp thing is an opportunity. I personally think we should be fighting and expanding what is legal, as opposed to shutting down what is federally legal right now. I think giving ammunition to the prohibitionists of the world, and that, like, a great example, that ridiculous lieutenant governor in Texas, that like somehow aligning with people like that is in no way, shape, or form helpful to anyone related to cannabis. And it should be more of, how do we work together, and what form factors and what milligram caps, and how could this be sold? And I think there needs to be or if I'm a cannabis company, it's been one of the most frustrating things as a cannabis investor is, why aren't the MSOs or leading US cannabis companies all over cannabis beverage? Why aren't they dominating it? Why haven't they bought out some of the leading brands? I think it's because they just don't understand it. And it comes from this mindset of, I've got to protect this limited license market that I have, as opposed to protecting cannabis farmers. And so I have been more frustrated on the cannabis side than the hemp guys, because I believe that what hemp is showing, and especially hemp beverage, is that Americans love THC and Republicans love THC. You just have to do it in the form factor that they recognize, and not threaten them with a countercultural, or get into this social equity license bizarro world where you're pretending you're helping social equity people, but you're really just you're hurting them. You're giving checks to random people who then sell off their license. I just think the whole thing is just kind of gamed and bizarre how cannabis regulations work. And I just want to get to legalization. And I think the fastest way to legalization is showing mass adoption with no ill effects, so to speak. And that's why I think hemp has done this incredible service to the argument of legalization, because it shows that when freed from this, not that it's the end state that you want, or not that you want all these crazy products everywhere, but it's kind of doing an end run around these lies that the prohibitionists have told.
I partially agree.
I just think it's very complicated.
Yeah.
Look, here's the other thing: is it's hard for me to respond in just like a minute or.
Sure.
It's a very complicated, loaded question.
No, well, and that's exactly right. Is the challenge with what hemp has done is it's actually complicated the issue at the federal level, and I think that
I actually don't. Because I don't think so, because I believe that when it's showing Americans.
But Americans we've already been there. We've been at
majority support
for
legalization
for years.
What I mean by that is it's showing politicians you can't just get rid of this. You have to legalize some form of, look at Texas as an example. Without hemp, there is literally no way that you would have had an expansion of the medical program, or the Texas governor saying, I'm going to ban the attempt I'm going to veto the attempt to ban THC. A Republican governor did that. Now, why did he do that? Because he was looking at the polling numbers that said, oh my God, 70% of Republicans love hemp. What do they really love? They love THC. This is all about THC. So to me, hemp, the proper ways to do hemp, and especially hemp beverage, is like the battering ram to the gates to legalization. That's how I view it. And it's like destroying stigmas. And so you see these totally absurd arguments, and like it's going to destroy society, or that THC is going to make people go crazy. The psychosis rates have not changed. We have soaring adoption of cannabis and THC hemp beverage throughout this country and in Canada. Psychosis rate hasn't changed. Schizophrenia rate hasn't changed. The Wall Street Journal just came out with an article that said it causes auto accidents. Auto accidents fell in 2023 and they fell in 2024. And it's like, it's easy to Google it, but we have to take the power away from these prohibitionists. Do you see what I'm saying? We have to take it away from them, because they're just, and that's what I think hemp is doing, is it's making THC so popular that you can't ban it, or it's very difficult. Or you have a governor like California that bans it in a mistaken attempt to kind of save the wine industry and the regulated space, which they've made a mess of anyway. But even in Ohio, it's like, hey, I'm using this as a stopgap, and it's very explicit, so that we can get proper hemp regulations. And what I want to do is get the conversation away from the banning of hemp and just regulate, excuse my language, regulate the shit out of it. Well, that's what I want. What?
I say careful there, because that's what we said about cannabis, where we were like, just legalize this, give us access. We don't care what regulations you throw at us. And now we've got horrible regulations and horrible taxation. So regulating the shit out of it can have perverse consequences.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I guess it's better than always having the sword above your head, ready to cut your head off. And what I would love to happen is you just start having common sense kind of reform. One of the things that makes me excited is seeing GTI, seeing Curaleaf, seeing Trulieve making entrees into hemp, and realizing like, hey, how do we make this work? I think this is the more positive aspects of how we move all of legalization forward.
Right. So last question, speaking of GTI, because you mentioned GTI a bunch, but they've been really active with what they're doing with Rhythm and this public company, very strongly capitalized. To your point, does have a balance sheet. They just filed an S3 today to raise potentially up to $100 million in that. They're doing the carve out with the brands. They do have beverage already. How do you see them in the space? And
I think that they have so I'm the research consultant to the ETF TOKE. Right. They're the #1 position in TOKE.
Is it really?
And yeah.
Oh, I thought I looked at it yesterday. I didn't see a position. So you guys are number one.
No. Green Thumb has always been one of the top positions.
Oh, no, Green Thumb, but Rhythm.
Oh, not Rhythm. No, I'm sorry. Green Thumb is. Green Thumb is. The problem is Rhythm is so illiquid and it has such a tiny float that it's like in relation to its market cap, you just need a more liquid stock before you can really. I don't want to say it's being manipulated, but it's like it's a very, very tiny float. It's like the float might be 800,000 shares. It's really tiny, right? But with Green Thumb,
I think the float is
and
60
I look.
right?
What?
I think when I was reading through the S3, because
there's
some
15 million shares, but freely tradable. I want to say there's like 1.2 million. But then when you look at what insiders or friends and family own, it's probably like 800,000 shares of freely tradable stock in Rhythm.
Okay.
And so, like, you don't really know, but like, I see what they're doing. It's very interesting and complicated. But what I kind of lump Rhythm and Green Thumb together because I think it's a way for them to be very tax efficient, and I think it's an easy way that they could do a backdoor to being public, where they just merge them when they're allowed. But that's just guessing. I don't know. I mean, Green Thumb to me is very much like a black box. They're phenomenal operators, but when I look at Green Thumb, I think of the large MSOs, they're going to be the only one that show growth. This is very clear. They're the only one that'll show growth because of Minnesota. And then what's also interesting is you have Virginia coming up. We have in less than a month, we have an election, and they're already prepping for legalization. And the Democratic candidate is up on like 12 percentage points. She's pro-legalization. And so you could have just another market for GTI to launch in. Their balance sheet's one of the best. Their cash flows are some of the best. And that's why they're in just a so much stronger position than the others who are, when you look at some of the other larger companies, it's like, but it's at least they're moving. They're one of the most aggressive when it comes to like thinking about hemp, and they're just very smart operators and been great allocators of capital.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, good. Well, Jesse, doing a time check here, so I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, I think we're good, Morgan. Is there anything we didn't cover, Aaron, today that you wanted to chat about?
Yeah, I would just say is that just remember that, I want to reiterate the point that these stocks are very illiquid and that if you can see wild moves, and that, I think also the indexes, there really aren't a lot of investors out there that are acquiring these stocks or have new capital. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity if you do due diligence, and then it's also really interesting to understand what's in certain baskets and what isn't, and how they move. And I think this is one of the best times to be a cannabis investor. I think there's tremendous opportunity in hemp beverage, and I think there's interesting opportunities in the public market, but that please, you have to take a long-term view. And I think I've seen so much pain based on people betting on when reform is going to happen. And I think that hopefully we're very close, but that is a trade. And to me, when you get any kind of federal reform, that's when the beginning of the game starts. I think we're in spring training. I think we're in the preseason. It's a mess. You see different players, different teams. Teams may have a losing record, whatever. And I think you need to really ask who is going to perform well in the long term, either because where they are structurally in the market, what do their balance sheets look like, and also how efficient they are. And so efficiency is going to be very, very important, because as much as I believe that a Minnesota may hold their price, what happens if you have interstate commerce or something like that? What happens if hemp just starts ripping? And it's like, it becomes very, very important to pay attention to things like cost of production, and where the product is being produced. And this is why I spent so much time highlighting the unit level economics of like a Grow Rogue or a Glass House, is because they've kind of been built through these very, very competitive markets to survive anything. And it's going to be important one day.
No, I think that's a great way to leave it. If people want to learn more about Mindset Capital or catch your Substack, Aaron, where would you point them?
I think it's mindsetvalue.substack or Aaron at Aaron Value on X, though I'll always call it Twitter. And then I think at mindsetcapital.com, I'm pretty sure that's my website.
Okay.
But yeah, email me. I love getting feedback. It's one of the things I write twice a month or so, sometimes 3 times a month newsletter. It's free, but you get what you pay for. So be careful. I'm wrong. I have been wrong. I will make mistakes. But just I write it to clarify my thinking, to get feedback. I get great feedback from people and great comments. And I love hearing back from people because I learn just as much as everybody else.
Yeah, for sure. Well, great, Aaron. Appreciate you taking the time to join us today. It was a fun conversation. Really like talking about Minnesota and hemp as well. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. This was a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Morgan, always good to talk to you, my friend. Thank you all for listening. Don't forget to watch on YouTube. If you're over there, maybe subscribe and like the video as well. That stuff helps people find it. And we'll talk to you guys again soon. The views expressed in this podcast are provided for informational purposes only. Nothing we say should be considered research or a recommendation. All investing involves risk, including the loss of principal.